Now to shift a little bit more into GCI, or the Global Coherence Initiative, thought it'd be good just to share our original mission statement with you. And so the Global Coherence Initiative was founded, oh, I'm horrible here with past, but about around 12 years ago, it might be a little bit more than that now. And it's a science-based co-creative project to unite people in heart-focused care and intention, to facilitate the shift in global consciousness from instability and discord to balance, cooperation, and enduring peace. And I love what's happening now with the Global Coherence Pulse, where so many organizations are coming together now and uniting and co-creating and cooperating together. It's just been one of the visions we've had all along. So it's just wonderful to see this happening. And it is one of the signs of the shift is more collaboration and cooperation amongst organizations and people and groups around the planet. Now, there's two really main sides to the Global Coherence Initiative. One is the science, which is I'm primarily talking about today, and I'll kind of cover some of that. I certainly can't go too much in depth today. But also the other half is really the training and working with people to how do they become more coherent, right? So we also focus a lot on that, because it's what I'm going to be suggesting here today is that we live in a giant feedback system. The Earth's energetic systems and fields that we can measure affect us, but we also affect the field. So we have to be really working on both levels, what being quite self-aware of and responsible for what we're feeding the field, but also kind of down here on Earth in a certain way, really helping other people understand this and learning tools and techniques to be able to make their own shifts, to become, to awaken their own hearts and help awaken the heart of humanity. In a way, it's really another aspect of our mission. So two things that we're doing during these times to really help with this side of the Global Coherence Initiative, and basically I work at the HeartMath Institute, is one of our key programs that we had developed to launch this year is basically called the Heart Smarts Adventure e-learning program. This is an awesome program. Anyway, we're giving that away during these times. So we've targeted, we say 100,000 Coherent Kids Initiative. And we're already up, I think, 90, I heard yesterday, 93,000 kids have now gained access to this. But of course, we'll give away more than 100,000, but we'll continue to do this through the whole coronavirus situation. It's a perfect thing for parents that are having to do homeschooling and be involved with the kids now to be able to, a program that they can, again, it's e-learning based, kind of self-paced for ages 4 to 6 and up. So that's, if you're interested in that and you have kids or grandkids, or anybody that you think would benefit from this, please let them know to go to our website, heartmath.org/coherent kids. And we're making that available. And the other thing that the HeartMath Inc. group is doing, which is a separate organization from the Nonprofit Institute, is one of their key products for the year called the HeartMath Experience, which is a 90-minute video series that really teaches you the HeartMath tools and techniques and how to actually use those in daily life, is also being given away now during these times. So really I recommend that for actually learning the how-to of the HeartMath system. And for that, you also go to heartmath.org/HeartMath, HME for HeartMath Experience. So hopefully you will download those and let people, please help us get the word out. Okay, so the Global Coherence Initiative, I've kind of recently simplified our kind of scientific hypothesis to make them a little more people-friendly and taking them out of the science, quite as rigorous science language. Basically what we're saying here is that the Earth is constantly bathed in electromagnetic fields, and that's just scientific fact, many types of fields, in fact. And these, what I'm suggesting here, and we're suggesting at the Global Coherence Initiative, is that these fields quite literally connect every living organism on the planet, us included. Right? We all live within these fields, and fields within fields. So we're all living in this common vibrational field, and each of us contributes our own vibrations to that field, whether they're the depleting or the renewing, which is positive or negative, to the field. And this really has so much to do with our thoughts, feelings, and interactions, but especially our emotions. They're the big drivers here of what we're feeding the field. So this suggests that when large numbers of people can get together in a heart-centered state, heart-coherent state of love, compassion, and similar regenerative emotions, that generates a more coherent field environment. We know that locally. We can measure it, right? But I'm saying here, suggesting that we are coupled to the Earth's larger fields, which I'll describe what I mean by that in a minute. And so we're putting a coherence pulse into the field environment. And we certainly want to pulse the field, right, which we're doing with the global pulse, the global coherence pulse, but we also want to be aware of what we're doing in between where we come together and do the pulses, because we're always connected to and always feeding the field. So there's actually a lot of work that's been done. I mean, I have stacks this high of papers that have looked at the effects of the changes in the activity of the Earth's magnetic fields on human health and behavior. So this is just kind of a small sampling of the ones that are well established. In a way, well, the changes in the Earth's background magnetic environment affects our brain and nervous system activity, and again, in a measurable way, how well we perform on various tasks, our blood pressure, heart rate, hormones, so on. Actually, even the number of traffic violations and accidents, the number of tickets that get written and the number of accidents, kind of right along with the rhythm of the magnetic field. Hospital admissions for a wide range of health issues, not just heart attacks and strokes, but a wide range of things, especially mental emotional disorders, depression, anxiety, these types of things. And societal conflicts and criminal activity are also modulated by or riding kind of along with the rhythm of the power of the magnetic field data. And importantly, of all the body systems that have been studied, and a lot have been looked at, it's the heart rate variability of the rhythms of the heart that are most strongly affected and mostly synchronized to the rhythms in the magnetic field. And kind of the father of what's now called the field of helibiology, helo meaning sun in this case, is Alexander Chesovsky. And he is basically a Russian astronomer. And he got drafted into World War I. And being an astronomer, he was kind of keeping one eye on solar activity and what the sun was doing. And it occurred to him, or it appeared to him, that when there were more solar flares and more solar activity, that people down here on Earth were affected, and that there were bloodier battles, and that people were just kind of crazier in a certain way. And this got him intrigued. So after the war, he did an exhaustive study of human history, and to look at this potential connection. And he ended up creating what he called the Index of Mass Human Excitability. So he coined that term. And this next slide I'm going to show you is derived exactly from his original data. So this is from Alexander Chesovsky. Now what you're looking at here, let me just describe this for you. The blue line on top, if we start on the top panel on the far left, this is 1749. That's when this starts. And then you can see the rhythm going across, then it wraps around into the bottom panel up to 1928 when he published this data. Now what's being plotted here, is the number of major human events that occurred each and every year across that long time period. That's the blue line, okay? So these are big events. This would be like the onset of a war, major discoveries, things that had global implications, okay? The red line on the bottom is the solar cycle at the same time period, okay? I mean, if you look at that, I mean, there's obvious correlation here. These two are strongly correlated. And this, of course, has been confirmed many times over and brought into modern times. The same thing is true today. So the solar cycle is about a 10.5 to 11-year cycle. So you can kind of, that's the red line on the bottom. So that's kind of, and he went back to 1749 because at that time, that's how far back records had been recorded for the number of sunspots and types of things on the sun. So that's since then, through ice core data drilling, things like that, been able to go back much farther and see the similar things that are a much longer time span. So it kind of shows that we're deeply affected by the sun and its activity. Now, what they didn't know, what Chesowski didn't know actually, he also observed that there were changes in physiology, blood pressure, heart rate, these types of things that actually preceded, say, when a solar flare would happen on the sun, several days in advance of that plasma getting from the sun to the earth and disturbing the Earth's magnetic field. And he actually predicted that there had to be some unknown radiations from the sun. And remember, this is quite some time ago. This is long before the discovery of X-rays and high-frequency radio waves and these types of things were all unknown at that time, which we now know that the sun actually has. So in these peaks of the solar cycle, the sun is measurably, literally emitting more energy. Okay, so that kind of ties into this next concept here, well, not concept, set of data that's really important. That because I should probably mention here that in these peaks of the solar cycles that Chesowski showed us is when 80% during that period, onset of war, 80% of them occurred right at the peaks of those solar cycles, right in that narrow range. So this could feel like, well, the sun's out to get us or something, but it's just not that way. Because here's the critical and important thing I want to underline, is that these same periods of increased solar activity are also the greatest periods of human flourishing. More creativity, more scientific discoveries, more artistic expression, music, paintings, all this. And this was happening globally in cultures independent of each other. So the way I would invite you to think of this is during the increased solar cycle periods, the sun is literally putting out more energy measurably. That is radiating, and Earth was within the magnetic field of the sun, by the way, right? So that is connecting with the Earth's energetic systems, magnetic systems, and then down into us in our biology. So we have more energy is really what's happening. So it really gets down to how mature are we and self-regulated. How do we use these energy influxes? And especially when we're unaware that this is what's happening. In fact, I was a few years ago, I was doing presenting a keynote at a conference in Saudi Arabia, and I was talking about this data, and one of the audience members raises his hand and stands up and says, can't we just lock up all the politicians during that couple-year period around the solar cycles? What a great idea if we could really do that, because that's when, if you're not well self-regulated, you go start wars and create havoc. So anyway, I hope I've made that point clear enough. So to do the science side of things, we have to measure things. So we basically have to listen in, if you will, kind of metaphorically, although it may not be a metaphor, of the Earth's heartbeats and brainwaves. And to do this, we've launched or created what we call the Global Coherence Monitoring System. And this is a global network of very sensitive magnetometers that are designed specifically to measure the rhythms and fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, along with other instruments that I'll cover briefly at the end here, around the planet, to help us really more deeply understand how interconnected we are. So this is all told creating one of the largest experiments for intentionally evolving human consciousness. So we're about halfway there on our grid now. So we've got, currently we have active sites that are monitoring the Earth's resonance fields here at our location in Northern California, Lithuania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, and then shortly, hopefully, we would have probably had one in Colombia by now with the restrictions on travel and shelter in place. We haven't been able to do that. This is what the monitoring site here in Boulder Creek looks like. The actual magnetometers themselves, you can't see, they're about 3 feet or about 1 meter underground. This is the site here on our property. This is the one in Saudi Arabia, and it's really out in the middle of the desert. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And just a quick story here. When we were first talking with the person who's in the picture on the upper right there, who's a very well-known cardiologist that runs a large cardiac hospital in Saudi Arabia. We were talking about the site and where it was going to go and what we needed to do, and he kept telling me we have to build this block wall, which you can see behind us there. And I kept arguing with him, no, we don't need a block wall. They're underground, et cetera, et cetera. And I've never really asked them why. I just finally said, okay, we'll build a block wall, and learned the lesson there that you always listen to your local partners. So the desert is full of free-ranging camels that like to go scratch on themselves on things, and the sand drifts are just like you see in the movies, and they've had to bring in the heavy equipment a few times now to remove the sand that's coming over the top of the walls. So our site would have been quickly buried without that. So, and this is the landowner, so I just like to honor him there in the center of that. And one more story, and we'll move on. This is the site in South Africa, which is an awesome place for one of our sites. It's a huge 10,000 acre game preserve, where the wildlife is protected. So they've got the giraffes and the zebras and the hippopotamuses and all the critters. It's been my first time to Africa actually for this. So it's a great place for a site. And we were ahead of schedule, right? We were going to have about a day ahead of everything working. The site was in, and everything's working perfectly. And we have our pipes coming up out of the ground where we make our electrical connections to go up to the site computer and everything. And the park manager drives up in his little Jeep, and perfect. I wish I had. Oh, I do have a picture of it, but the hat, and the whole thing. I mean, the perfect icon of what a game park manager would look like. And he pulls up and checking on how things are going, looks down at our pipes and goes, boys, them there is elephant toys. So they love to pull things like that out of the ground. So off we went back to the store and to build our little block wall around the site there to elephant proof it. And sure enough, this is some pictures I took there on the site of some elephants not too far away. And so you can actually see some baby elephants kind of following mom there in the background. So every site has its own story. I just thought I'd share a couple of those with you. So to kind of get more into the science of what we're talking about, one of the magnetic fields we live within is called the geomagnetic field. And that's the thing our compass is tuned into, what gives us a north and south pole. And we certainly want to have a magnetic field. It's the magnetic field of Earth, geomagnetic field, that protects us from so much. And without a magnetic field, Earth would turn into Mars very quickly. The solar wind would just blow away the atmosphere and the water, and that would be a very dry, barren planet very quickly without a magnetic field. So it's something to appreciate. If there's nothing else to appreciate that we have a magnetic field that allows life as we know it to exist on Earth. Now, the geomagnetic field is actually a pure magnetic field, just like a bar magnet you would stick on your refrigerator. It's pure magnetic field. Now, if you try and travel back to when you were in science class, remember when most people got to dump iron filings on a glass plate? And I actually need to make a graphic of this. And then you put the magnet under the glass plate, and then you saw that the iron filings kind of jump around and then show you, they outline the shape of the field of the magnet, whatever type magnet you had. But the point here is, if you think back to that, those iron filings line up in lines, right? It wasn't this homogeneous black blob. They're very specifically to lines. And what that's showing us is the kind of a picture of what are called magnetic field lines, or flux lines are sometimes called. So the magnetic field of Earth is no different. It's these and that's why these white lines on the graph here are showing us are the magnetic field lines. Now here's the interesting thing, is these magnetic field lines, quite literally, I'm not talking about metaphor here now, act like guitar strings. You can pluck them and they vibrate just like a guitar string. Okay? Now, just like in a guitar or any stringed instrument, the length of the string and the tension of the string controls or determines its resonant frequency, right? Or its note or its pitch, whatever term we want to use here, the quality of the sound that it makes. So the Earth's magnetic field lines are extremely long, right? Thousands and thousands of miles long. So they're very long, so they have a low frequency. And if you change the tension or the length, they change their frequency. So this is what's plucking the strings of the Earth's field is the solar wind rushing by. So the solar wind is the high energy particles kind of being blown out of the sun that travel about 1 million miles per hour on a quiet day. And they're strong enough, the solar winds, that it compresses the magnetic field of the Earth on the daytime side and stretches it out on the nighttime side. But, remember, Earth is turning in all this, and so is the sun. So you have this complex interplay, complex dynamics within the solar wind and the interaction between the Earth's magnetic fields and the solar wind. Simply said, as the solar wind is coming by, it's plucking the strings of the Earth and vibrating the strings. Now, this is some really neat, relatively new data here that is from a satellite system that NASA put up that has 5 probes just to study the Earth's magnetic field. So this is not an artist drawing. This is actual data from these satellites showing us the little white dot in the center. There's the Earth, obviously. So we're actually starting to see here the ringing, the vibration of the Earth's magnetic field, or the field lines. And these are technically called field line resonances. Now, when we measure them down here on Earth with our global coherence monitoring system, you see that there's a range of frequencies down here. And one of the frequencies that can occur, it's kind of one of the primary or standard resonant frequencies of the field line resonances, is a frequency around 0.1 hertz. But this whole range where you see all the peaks down here, up to about 0.5, 0.6 hertz, these all directly overlap our nervous system, heart rhythms, and nervous system activity. These are all in the same range. So our physiology is the core components of our physiology are operating in the same range of the Earth's field line resonances. And again, one of the primary ones that's been measured for years, actually, by others, not just us, but nobody's put the dots together at 0.1 hertz. That's important because that is the same frequency as our heart rhythms when we're in a coherent state. So when we're in coherence, we're more coherent, we have a stronger signal, we're putting a more coherent signal into the field environment, and it's also vibrating at the same range as one of the primary resonant frequencies of Earth. Okay, let that soak in a little bit, what I just said there. Now, the second set of magnetic rhythms that are relevant here to this discussion are called Schumann resonances. And I find there's a lot of confusion out there about Schumann resonances. But Schumann resonances are basically magnetic waves that travel around the surface of the Earth in all directions. And they're trapped between the surface of the Earth and the bottom of the ionosphere. And if you're not familiar with the ionosphere, just visualize that or think of that as this big soap bubble around the planet. It starts about 50 miles up from the surface of the Earth and goes out to about 150 miles, depending upon seasons. And this is a layer of what's called plasma, highly ionized ions. And plasma is considered the fourth state of matter in physics, and it has a lot of unique and special properties. I won't go into all those here, but one of the properties of this plasma, the ionosphere, is that the bottom layer of the ionosphere is like a mirror to lower frequency magnetic waves. They bounce off of it. In fact, this is how ham operators or amateur radio operators, they use that to send their radio signal up, bounce it off the ionosphere, and that's how somebody in the United States is talking to somebody in Europe or China. And if you're lucky and get a second bounce, now you're talking to people in New Zealand and Australia and so on. So this is a well-known phenomenon. And in the 1950s, a German mathematician suggested mathematically that these resonant frequencies around the Earth had to exist. And his name was Otto Schumann. So they got named after him. So Schumann resonances are completely controlled and determined by the geometry of the cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere. And there's 8 of them, as you see here. This is a spectrum of Schumann resonances. That 7.83 hertz is the first one, and 14, 20, and so on. And then the 8th one is actually 59 hertz, which is hard to see because of the power grid, the 60 hertz power grid. All of these overlap the same rhythms as our brains. So 7.8 hertz is right on that boundary between theta and alpha rhythms, if we use that language to describe brainwave frequencies. But all of them interact, or well, they do interact, but overlap in brainwave frequencies. So hope you understand what I just said here. So we have 2 different magnetic systems of the Earth, and our physiological rhythms are vibrating in the same frequency range, hearts and brains. Now, interestingly, if we measure the magnetic fields produced by our body, the heart's magnetic field is the huge one. You can measure it in 8 feet from the body. You can measure a brainwave about 1 inch. It's kind of the same ratio for Earth. The field line resonances, first thing I described, are the really powerful rhythms. And I'll show you this in a second. And the Schumann resonances are much smaller. So it's kind of the same ratio between Earth and humans. I don't know if that means anything or not, but it's really an interesting observation. So one just comment here, the Schumann resonances are exactly the same frequency as they were when they were first measured in 1959 and 1960. Okay, so yes, they can be temporarily disturbed, through a solar flare or something, and kind of shift around because the ionosphere has been kind of hammered. But as soon as things settle back down to normal, they go right back to their same resonant frequencies. So, and it's a good thing once you understand what controls the resonant frequencies of the Schumann resonances, which is the geometry. And the ionosphere is really important for life on Earth as well. It's a whole other shield that protects us. So we really don't want that to change its geometry. Okay, so this is just briefly, these are the magnetic data from different sites around the world. So California, New Zealand, and Canada here. The main point here is it used to be thought that if you measured these magnetic waves anywhere on Earth, they would be the same everywhere, because it's a global phenomena. Well, that's out the window, I'm sorry, because you can see that there are dramatic differences in these. There are global correlations, yes, but important local differences. So let's just focus on the red one here. That, what you're seeing, that big wave, that big kind of sine wavy looking thing, that is a field line resonance. That's one of the magnetic field lines vibrating like a guitar string. And then if you look at that kind of noisy looking stuff on the red line, and then in the center where it says the little dotted box is, I'm going to show you the next slide. I'm going to zero in on that. And that's the Schumann resonances. So you can kind of see the relative power difference between the field line resonances and the Schumann resonances here. So it's really the vibrations of the Earth are the same as the heart rhythm, autonomic nervous system rhythms are the big powerful ones. The Schumann resonances are important, don't get me wrong, and our brains do synchronize in and out of phase with the Schumann resonances. So there really is a coupling that goes on there in a measurable way. Okay, so they are important, but let's just put things in perspective. The field line resonances are the big daddies. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly share a couple of studies here. I know we're getting a little bit long on time. This is a study we published in one of the Nature Journal's scientific reports. And this was a long-term study where we were measuring a group of people's heart rate variability with the devices. You were ambulatory recorders that measure heart rate variability, lightweight devices. So this group of people wore them 24 hours a day, right? Most days a week over a 5-month period. So this is a very long period. As far as I know, it's the only study that's ever been done like this, where we had very long-term recordings. And we were able to then look at multiple events that occurred over this time period of changes in different environmental parameters, in the energetic environment we live in. Now, one of those is cosmic rays. And cosmic rays are the high energy particles that come from outside of our solar system, okay? And these are kind of complicated graphs, so I'll try and explain them. All of the different markers you see here, all the little triangles and yellow and circles, this is the response of our heart rate variability to an increase in cosmic rays. And this is a huge response. I mean, this is really big, way above the significance lines, and it's over 40 hours. So what this is indicating is that when there is an increase in cosmic ray energy, our physiology responds in a positive way, okay? Now, this is kind of contrary to some previous studies that only looked at hospital admissions around disturbances. So I'm going to hold my comment on this for a minute here. Then the next one here, we're looking at what's called solar radio flux. So the sun, independent of the photons and the solar wind and the high energy particles, also emits a radio frequency wave, which is called it's sometimes called the F107, but basically it's solar radio flux energy. This is a 2.8 gigahertz around that range radio wave. And what we see is when that increases, that we also saw a positive response in people's HRV, okay, an increase in HRV in a positive way. And that kind of, you can see here, fell off again, but kind of was overall a positive effect throughout the 40-hour period, with a lot of periods of significance in the various HRV measures. Again, and here's the same thing for increases in the Schumann resonant frequencies. So this is the band of all the Schumann resonances, the power of them. When the Schumann resonance, or the coherence in the Schumann resonances, be another way of thinking of this, increases, we also see a somewhat delayed, but a positive HRV response, okay? So taken together, all of these, along with a bunch of other studies, I need to put this in context. What this is indicating is that these energy influxes, these magnetic influences, and cosmic rays and solar radio fluxes are actually energy sources, that our physiology has a way of absorbing and utilizing this energy. And not only would people's HRV go up, in another large study we did with 1,600 people, they also reported in that study that when you have increases in these same factors, that people sleep better, feel better, have better cognitive function, get along better socially, and so on. So it's a very different picture is emerging here. I know some of the types of literature talk about external influences helping facilitate the shift in consciousness. So this data is kind of supporting that. That may not be that kind of new agey or crazy. That this is actually real data from multiple studies that are starting to support these facts. And then this is field line resonances. You see an immediate, fairly strong effect that lasts for 4 or 5 hours as well here. So these are all good things. Now, interestingly, what we didn't see such a strong response to was magnetic field disturbances. And this is important because most of the studies that are done prior to us having a global coherence monitoring system, they just didn't have much data. The only data they really had was what's called AP or KP indexes. And this is a measure of magnetic field disturbance, which happens when you have a solar flare, something in that solar wind gets disturbed and the plasma from the sun hits the magnetic field of the earth and it gets all incoherent and very disturbed. And there is, in fact, increased hospital admissions for a lot of different things during those periods. But what we, in the study I just showed you, we were looking not at disturbances, but at normal times, right? In fact, when we look at the magnetic field disturbance indexes, we saw very little effect on the HRV sub, but not nearly as profound as the other factors that we're now able to measure. So here's another study that kind of started a new line of research for us. It was some surprising findings. And this was a study that was done, again, doing long-term recordings, in this case, over a 30-day period continuously of a group of people. And to give context here, this group of participants was spread across the state of California. So some quite literally were in southern part of the state, some here in central, some more north. A lot of them didn't even know each other. These are people that are going about their normal days, just wearing these devices 24/7 for 30 days. And our original question was to ask the question, so when we see changes in the resonant frequencies and so on of the earth, do we see changes in the autonomic nervous system? Which is what HRV measures, by the way. HRV reflects the autonomic activity in our autonomic nervous system dynamics. So there was a lot of those kind of changes. That this is all published if you want to see that. But here's the surprise. When we time synchronized the heart rate variability data, the beat-to-beat change in the heart rates across these people, across the state, time synchronizing, just average them together, the HRV. And what we thought we would see was a noisy kind of line of nothing, just kind of around zero. Because why would my HRV have any relate to somebody else's? And circadian rhythms were all removed because that would be an obvious thing, day-night differences, to add a little relevance here. But that's not what we saw. So on this graph, the gray and black line were two different HRV measures, important HRV measures. And we see that they're far from a noisy flat line. What this is showing us is that, in fact, this group of people across the states, heart rhythms are synchronized, okay, over a slow wave. And then it was another new finding here is this other much slower rhythm in the heart rhythm, much slower than what had been previously known. And so this was jaw-dropping. We just did not expect this. And then when thinking about this, we realized that, well, the only thing that could really explain this would be an external signal that everybody was exposed to across the state. Gee, our own hypothesis, the resonant frequencies in the earth might explain this. So the red line you're seeing here actually is, you can think of it as coherence, but power in the resonant frequencies, in this case of the Schumann resonance frequencies. So again, you can see the correlation here. You don't even need statistics, although they're very strong statistics and a very highly significant effect. And on the far right, you see the spectrums of the two waves, and you can see they're exactly over this time period, the same frequency. So what this was indicating was really surprising, first of all, that we would see this degree of synchronization to the resonant frequencies in the earth and in our physiology. I mean, we would never have predicted this. But so this is implying that we're far more interconnected with the Earth's energetic systems than previously even believed or projected. So that was pretty profound, and figure we better replicate this. You know, a relatively small group, California. You know, we're pretty wacky out here anyway. So we were able to get some funding and replicate this study and extend it on a much larger scale. So we had over 100 participants and groups of 20 in 5 countries. Okay, so we chose countries in the same areas where we have our magnetic monitoring sites. So this is a lot of data to do this continuous HRV monitoring and this large of groups of people globally. So here's some of our participants: New Zealand, Lithuania, California, and Saudi Arabia, and then there's also a group in England as well. And this is it's not quite as simple as what I'm going to present here, but this is the basic essence of the findings. So when we look at these global groups, on the left, the black line is the power of the resonant frequencies, in this case, the Schumann resonance power. And the blue line is a subgroup from the groups all around the planet that are synchronized together and synchronized to the rhythms in the Earth's magnetic field. Again, an amazing degree of synchronization. And it's kind of mind-boggling when you see this to me. And keep in mind that these are people made up of groups from all around the world. So, I mean, they're in radically different time zones, but yet our hearts in this slow wave rhythm are synchronizing to each other and because we're synchronized to the Earth's magnetic field. And the graph on the right side here is the same, different subset of the subjects, but now the black line in this case is the power in the resonant frequencies, the field line resonances of the other set of magnetic waves. And again, see this amazing degree of synchronization across these 2 different sets of magnetic frequencies and our physiology. So some of this is published, some of the subgroup data. We're getting ready to publish some of the larger data. Now, this is also another surprise that I would not have predicted. In the same study I just described, in the middle of it, we had all of the groups all over the world. We actually connected by Skype, I think, at that time, and did what we call heart lock-in for 15 minutes. And heart lock-in is a heart map technique. It's more a heart meditation technique where you really lock into the frequencies of the heart and create coherence and radiate love, care, compassion to others and yourself and others in the planetary field environment. And so what happened, we were, of course, making the HRV of all the members and all the groups. And a couple of significant things happened. All of the HRV, most of the groups and the individuals in the groups were much more coherent during the heart lock-in. But their synchronization to each other within the groups was significantly increased. We're also able to look at how in sync the so on the left side is the 20 individuals in the day before actually the heart lock-in day. And the graph on the right is the degree of synchronization over the next 24-hour period on the day of doing the heart lock-in. Again, never would have predicted this. And the data from this particular group analysis is already published. That's why I'm showing it, but we are getting very close to publish this for all the groups around the world. And they all look the same way. So universally, all the groups, the individuals, except for 1 or 2 here and there, but look just like what you're seeing on this graph. So we became not only more in sync with ourselves and each other, but with the Earth's field from just doing 15 minutes of a heart coherent lock-in or meditation, increased our synchronization with the Earth's field for the next 24 hours. Okay, so, and there's a lot of studies now, I should also stay here, that indicate we want to be in sync with the Earth. Okay, there's a lot of benefits from that. Maybe another time we'll go into some of the studies and more details there. Now, I mentioned earlier other scientific instruments, and one of those we're actually taking this over now, but it's called the Global Consciousness Project. A lot of you will be aware of that. This was started by Dr. Roger Nelson at Princeton about 22 years ago, and it was a 20-year-long experiment of a global network of physical devices or random number generators that are very rigorous scientific designed instruments to create pure random strings of random numbers. And to make a long story short, what this project has found, even though the mechanisms aren't yet fully understood, that when something on Earth, some event triggers an outpouring of emotion, not in thought intention. This is very clear from the study. It's emotion that does this. When some event happens that triggers widespread emotions in humans, globally, not just locally, this global network of physical devices is modulated in a way. There's a coherence that's introduced into them. So they're no longer as random. It's a small but measurable effect. So there's a type of coherence that is, but all the devices in a simultaneous way have this effect. So it's truly a really neat scientific instrument for measuring global field effects. And all the scientific theories and modeling certainly suggest this is a field effect model that describes it. But of all the studies that were done, this is my favorite, and I think Dr. Nilsson would agree it's his favorite as well. He had a number of these events, what they call formal events that are predicted and so on, and then rated them for their level of love and compassion. Okay, so like the global prayer days, global peace days, things like this would be where there's a lot of love and compassion in those events. So that's the bar. Many events now analyzed together in the high bar there. Then medium, these are events that have a lot of emotionality, but not necessarily a lot of love and compassion. So this would be things like Super Bowls and World Cups, a lot big sporting events, these types of things. The ones that in low, these would be the emotional. Analysis shows is that events of love and compassion have a significantly greater effect in modulating these physical devices globally. So this is, as far as I know, one of the best scientific instruments that we have for actually showing that our consciousness literally, globally, is modulating the physical world and changing the behavior of these physical devices, and that love and compassion has the greatest effect. Now, this really ties in nicely with the perspectives from the Global Coherence Initiative. Is what I'm basically suggesting here is that as we as humans become more coherent, and we become more coherent by becoming more loving and compassionate, that measurably gives us more coherent rhythmic activity and more coherence in our bodies. We have a measurably more coherent field environment, right, which we know through resonance principles, because coherence is critical for resonance to occur. Without coherence, there is no such thing as resonant coupling, like between tuning forks. So as we become more coherent, we are more coherently connecting to the Earth's field environment and feeding that information into the larger global field. So this is just another way, I think, of showing that that is exactly what might be happening here through this system. And so Dr. Nelson, just to mention here, has asked us at the HeartMath Institute to take over the Global Consciousness Project as he's retiring. And we are in the process of doing that and developing what we're calling GCP 2.0, where it'll be a lot of technology improvements have happened over the last 20 years. So we're in the process now of really creating the next version of this that we hope will be more sensitive and much more user-friendly for more citizens and scientists to get involved and have a much greater global network. So basically what the data also suggests here is that when we're together, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same room, but when we are together anywhere energetically and in a coherent state, especially, that there is an amplification effect, in this case of our heart-focused compassion. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, what I'm really saying here is this is a self-reinforcing giant feedback system, right? A vibrational energy. And when we do it together, it amplifies the effects, and we can put a much stronger coherent pulse or signal into the field environment, right? And all living systems within that greater field, the Earth's bigger field environment, are going to be affected, even though they may not be consciously aware of it, and uplifted by that more coherent signal. And as we do that often enough and long enough, we can eventually dissipate the fear and incoherent signals that are currently in our global field environment. Now, another aspect of the research, this is all part of the global coherence pulse work we're doing. So there's the Earth's magnetic field monitoring, the global consciousness data, the random number generators, and we're also in the process of launching a global system for measuring the electrical potentials of trees. So I call this giving a voice to nature. And the reason that we're doing this is, I kind of said, all living systems are within the field. We can't escape it. Even if you're in the space shuttle, you're or the space station, you're still within the Earth's field. So trees are an awesome living system that make great research subjects because they don't run away and they don't mind us putting a couple of small electrodes in them. So what we're doing here is measuring the electrical activity of trees with these small little devices and electrodes you can see in the picture here. And as it turns out, trees have a very rich and complex electrical life with surprisingly high voltage potentials. They're in the same range as human heartbeats, and that these trees seem to be generating and having different patterns. So what we'll be initiating here is a global system to measure trees worldwide. And some lessons learned from the random number generator data, we know that it takes multiple events before you can make any conclusions. And you need to look at lots of devices. So in this case, we'll have lots of trees that we can look and see, is there a similar change across multiple trees globally that occurs in response over time to many different events? And then you can really build a very strong scientific case that is in fact the case, which we obviously believe it will be, but we still have to prove that. So here's some of the key research questions. Do the electrical responses in trees, multiple trees, correlate to events that trigger emotional outpourings in large numbers of people? Do trees communicate energetically over large distances? Are trees affected by human emotions? Right, so these are some of the questions we'll be asking. And the last one here is kind of interesting. Can trees help inform us of earthquakes? And there's a very solid scientific reason for believing they can. And one of our collaborators, a guy named Friedemann Freud, who is kind of the grandfather of pre-earthquake research, he was a very good scientist, has proven now that rocks under pressure, like in earthquake fault zones, literally turn into batteries. And this is a completely new mechanism. I won't go into the details here, but are sustained long-term current flows that flow through the earth very rapidly and up to the surface of the earth. So trees having their root system into the ground make awesome sensors for really understanding the currents and voltages that are going on in the earth itself. So in our tree network work, we're doing two different looks at the trees. One that looks at the tree potentials, and then one from the ground potentials to the tree. So that could also be another neat benefit of this tree system. So the last thing I would like to share. So basically what I'm seeing here is that with the work we're doing, and especially in collaboration with the global Coherence Pulse community, because without the people really adding the heart to the planet, we don't have anything to measure. Right, so we're bringing large numbers of people together at the same time and being able to measure their actual coherence, and that's what the Global Coherence App is all about, and why we're really inviting all the partnering organizations to really suggest to the membership that they download the Global Coherence App, so we can track you, see what your coherence level is, not individually, of course, but that your data will never be shared with anybody, by the way. So if you do download the app, please, when you register, it's going to ask, do we have your permission to use your data in research? And I would really, please say yes to that. Your data will never be shared, and your name will certainly never be associated with your data. So it's totally private, but that will allow us to use your data in future research projects to ask the questions about the coherence level, the number of people who are coherent, how many people does it take, for example, to really see a shift in our other measures, in the trees, in the magnetic field data, and in the random number generator network. So we're really hoping to put this all into one house here and correlate all of these things to give us a completely new generation that's never been done before of being able to look at how we affect the world and other living systems. So I would certainly invite you to download the app and get involved. There, it does measure and reflect your own personal coherence if you have a heart map sensor, one of the HRV sensors, but you don't have to have a sensor to use it. And you can see what the group's coherence is. And so there's different feedback streams. This is just one of them. The ring in the center here shows you your personal coherence. It gets really big and glowy when you're more coherent. And the outer rings reflect the global group, the community who's there with you now, how coherent they are. One of the neat things, even if you don't have a sensor, is the map. And this is really awesome. People love the map. So all the little points of light showing up around the world, and who's somebody there with you right now participating in a global coherence pulse or a heart focused meditation. And these are literally points of light. They're points of light on a map, but they're also points of light in the real world of people radiating coherent heart energy into the global field. And for those that want to take it a bit deeper and really be involved in the future research as well, it's awesome to get one of the sensors, the little ear sensors that go in your earlobe, either connect via Bluetooth to the app, or if you have an iDevice or a lightning sensor that you just plug in, use that sensor. So this allows us to measure the global coherence and also your own personal coherence as well, and track that and how much coherence, what not only your personal coherence is, but how much coherence you're adding personally to the field environment. So with that, it was the end of what I wanted to share, and I'd just like to leave you with inviting you and hoping that you will take some pauses throughout the day, a little time to tune in. Just ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? How much of my time today have I been feeding the field with appreciation, kindness, cooperation with others, versus how much have I been feeding the field maybe with some irritation, impatience, frustration, anxiety, etc. What I'm suggesting here is it all matters, and we're always all connected to the field. So I invite you to help us shift the field environment and become coherence builders. Thank you for your time and attention.